Hello, students of medieval history. Today we're going to take a look at Islam and the spread of the Islamic faith, the origins of the Islamic faith, and we will conclude with an examination of the land of three religions, which is Al-Andalus Spain, referring to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in the High Middle Ages, really the golden age of you might call religious cosmopolitanism, that the faiths were tolerated in one region for one time for one short period. So we will conclude there, but let us begin at the beginning. Where does the Islamic faith originate? Well, it originates out of the Arabian Peninsula. And the Arabian Peninsula geographically is quite flat and rocky, arid desert area, and at the time of the origins of the faith, this is in the early 7th century. There is not a lot of economic activity going on. There is some nomadic communities that live there that are scratching their living off the rocks. There are not large cities whatsoever. It is a ruggedly rural area that is composed primarily and almost completely of small villages and hamlets. And almost the entire bit of trading that is going on here relates to agriculture. And that's really can be said for a lot of the ancient world and medieval world. But these people were pastoralists. The Arabian Peninsula is not really suited whatsoever for the growth of row crops, such as wheat, corn, and these kinds of things. Rather, it is very well suited for goats and sheep. You can't even really have many cattle or anything like that. It's just a terribly arid and not very fertile area of the world. So, as I was saying, you can see here on this map that the makeup of the community is in its human composition is tribal, that there are many different tribal communities and their regional areas that are controlled by their headmen, and I do mean men. It's a highly patriarchal culture, and there's no centralized authority. This is really a confederation or just a tribal organization that's where they would meet face to face. This is a community where you knew everyone, and that the things were arbitrated through tribal governments, that you would go sit around the fire and you would talk with the other leaders of these various tribes, and you would make decisions. And these people, while they were nomadic, they were also very warlike. That they often fought each other, and they had great disagreements over grazing rights and land rights, which can be life and death in the situation where you have to have large herds of animals in order to survive and for your families to prosper. These people were also at the time polytheistic, meaning they worshipped many gods. Each tribe had its own set of deities, and the deities, like with all sort of pagan, what we will call pagan religion, has every community will have its own deity, and very highly localized and individualistic religions. So, who was Muhammad? So we know a little about Muhammad's early life. Muhammad was the prophet. He was the final revelation of Allah, the God of Abraham, the God of the Muslims. And he received the final revelation from God via the angel Gabriel. And Muhammad, he was born in the late 570s within one of these Arabian tribes called the Quraysh. And he was a trader, and around the age of 40, he received his famous revelations from Allah through the angel Gabriel, which if you follow the Christian or Judaism faiths, that Gabriel is an angel that makes its appearances there. So within these revelations, Muhammad was told that there is but one God, and that is Allah, that all these other gods are just fictitious, that they are created by humankind, and that in reality the one true God is Allah. And Muhammad was really kind of renowned for his his integrity, and he had a very high reputation for his ability to be able to arbitrate and work with people. So he was called in 610 to act as sort of a middle party between two other tribes, and he went to Medina, and there he stayed and he lived and he made his reputation. He This is one of the more famous events, and he calls this the Hijra, when he returns to Medina, and he forms this state around his revelations from Allah, and eventually, as Muhammad is chosen to kind of be the sort of the head man in Medina, this town in the Arabian Peninsula, he finds himself getting into wars with competing tribes, and especially the one competing town of Mecca. And Muhammad and his forces from Medina eventually are victorious over the Meccans. But let us turn then, after the conquest of Mecca, and Muhammad then sets down to really spell out what the Islamic faith was all about, and he reveals the teachings of Allah. And what does Islam itself mean? Well, it means submission, or it means to surrender. That you are surrendering yourself completely over to Allah. That you have confessed yourself and you surrender as a disciple of Allah. So Muslim literally means one who has surrendered to Allah. And we will hear the word Ummah, which even in today means all Muslims, kind of the family of Allah. And you might think of this in the same way that when I say the word Christendom, could mean all Christians, whether you are a Baptist, Roman Catholic, or an Eastern Orthodox. It doesn't matter. That it's sort of the body of Christ that is in Christendom. Well, the Ummah is this same plays this same role within Islam. That it is the sort of the entirety of the body of Allah, if you will. So within Islam, the most sacred thing is the Quran itself, and that is where Muhammad's the revelations of God to Muhammad were recorded. And initially, this is just oral traditions. It is the prophet that is telling his revelations and teaching his revelations. Our earliest manuscript of the Quran, we have one manuscript from the late 7th century, or the early 7th century. The late 7th century. Forgive me. This is a text that took nearly 2 centuries to finally reach its culmination. The final version of the Quran is brought together almost 2 centuries after Muhammad's death. This is not a unique development in sacred texts, that it often takes quite a while to put together and discern kind of all the true writings of a founder. We see the same thing within Christianity. The Bible is not itself put together until almost 200 years after the death of Jesus Christ. So we see within the Quran that Muslims believe that these are the literal words of God that have come through Muhammad, the final revelation of God, of Allah, through his prophet. And it is made up of 114 sutras, which are the chapters, and these are concentrated on telling the story of Muhammad and his revelations, but they are also designed to tell Muslims how to live. They are based upon how one is supposed to behave, what they are supposed to do. They teach virtues, and they teach really how one is supposed to behave throughout their life, the things that they can and cannot do, and how one ultimately achieves otherworldly salvation. Now, within Islam, there is no creed or official statement of faith. It is merely interpreted from taking one's reading of the Quran. And unlike Christianity, which has a doctrine of the Trinity, which is the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, like Judaism, Islam is completely monotheistic. It has one God, and that is it. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. It is it. And the Quran is the absolute and complete culmination of God's teachings. So within the Quran, practices develop, and they call these the 5 pillars of Islam. The first being the Shahada, meaning you confess that there is but one God, and that is Allah. You have the Salat, which is that you pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. The Shawm, which means that during the month of Ramadan, this sacred month during the year, that every year this is observed by all Muslims, and you are supposed to fast from sun up to sundown to commemorate to commemorate your faith. Then you have the Zakat, which is that all Muslims are required to give alms to the poor, to look after the needy, and to help those who are suffering. And then you have the Hajj, which is where all Muslims, if possible, are supposed to make a pilgrimage once in their life to the city of Mecca. So these are the 5 core teachings within the Quran, often called the pillars. Within the Islamic faith, which is not... which would be difficult for one in the West to kind of understand, but there's really no particular priesthood. There are people called sheikhs that often teach within mosques, which are the temples of Islam, but they are thought of not of really as a priest, but simply as a teacher of the law, or a teacher of the Quran. And then you have an imam, which is thought of as a prayer leader. In mosques, it is absolutely gender segregated. Men pray with men, and women pray with women. And then there are schools of legal thought. This is where you get into differing views on how to interpret the Quran, because always everything is not perfectly clear cut. But you will get varying interpretations throughout history within Islam, and it continues to be this way today. But these are legal scholars, and these are not really a priesthood or something of that nature. So Mecca is considered to be the most sacred city within the Islamic world, and they have this thing called the Kaaba, which is a very dark sacred stone that was believed that the patriarch Abraham sacrificed, or was going to sacrifice his son Isaac on this stone. What it was, or what it actually is, we are unsure. But within Islamic tradition, this is what it is believed to be. It is kind of to be the center of the universe within the Islamic worldview. And this is a place that all Muslims try to go to really commemorate their faith, and to demonstrate the great piety within their religion. That's a very important religious journey that they're all able to go on as they financially can. So within the Islamic faith, it might be strange or shocking even that if you read the Christian Bible or the Torah within Judaism, that you will find many of the characters that are within these other faith texts within the Quran. And actually, you will find even Jesus within the Quran. He's the prophet second only to Muhammad. And how this works was that the Muslims believe that God revealed himself, or Allah revealed himself through prophets. And each prophet spoke to a particular time, culture, people, and Jesus was among these people. The patriarch Abraham was among these people. And finally, Muhammad was the final revelation, the greatest prophet, the last revelation of Allah to his people. So both Judaism and Christianity are incomplete revelations, though that they are authentic and real revelations from Allah to the world at that time. So, besides the Quran, you have two other authoritative pillars within the Islamic faith tradition. That is the Hadith and the Sunnah. The Hadith is simply a book of the sayings of the Prophet. These are not the revelations of Allah, but these are how Muhammad wise syllogisms that he would use, things like this, that how he would taught people to live, what he thought on various issues, and that is contained within the Hadith. Within the Sunnah are how the Prophet behaved, what he did, where he went, and how he reacted to sort of certain situations and how he practiced the faith. And this is collected, these two things are sort of collected later by his followers, by the authoritative teachers, the caliphs and the imams, and they are put together by the 8th and 9th centuries. And there is much editing that occurs as they try to piece this together to make it as authentic as possible to being Muhammad's, the true sayings and teachings of Muhammad. So, within Islam, you can marry up to any man can marry up to 4 women at one time. So polygamy is allowed as long as the man can afford to care for these women. Now, this is very highly patriarchal culture, and at face value, we might think, oh my gosh, the horror of this. But in the ancient world, in the medieval world, marriage is not necessarily about romance. It's not about finding your soulmate, but rather it's about finding a way how you can survive. So, in the Arabian world, it's very difficult for a woman to survive without being married. It's just the way it was in that time. Whether that's right or wrong, we're not here to debate. But simply, this very often are just political arrangements for the survival of families and for women to be able to continue to live not in a state of poverty. So when Muhammad died, his successors are called caliphs, which comes to mean the commander of the faithful, and the caliph is God's deputy on earth. You can sort of think of a caliph as kind of like a pope and a commanding general, all in one person, and they could not have any more revelations of the faith, but there is some debate on how they could interpret the faith, how they could live, but they would become the leaders of the Ummah, which was small initially. It was not a huge group of people, but after the death of Muhammad, there was some dispute on who should take over and lead the community. Now, the first 4 caliphs are called the Rashidun caliphs, which are the rightly chosen. And the first one was Abu Bakr, which was Muhammad's father-in-law. The last of the Rashidun caliphs was Hussein, Ali, which was the 4th of the caliphs. And this is really how the division in our own current world still remains to this day between who was the correct caliph to be chosen after Ali. And the Shias believe that they follow the bloodline of Muhammad within the being Ali being the correct caliph, that it's the bloodline that matters, and the Sunnis follow the line of Abu Bakr. So the caliph is, as I say, the commander of the faithful, and they come to play an extremely powerful role within the the Levant and the Arabian world and sort of the Fertile Crescent, as well as Northern Africa, as Islam will expand enormously. And we need to just speak for a moment about the concept of jihad, which can be translated as holy war. And within the Quran, this is a concept that is designed to both protect and grow the ummah. And to say that early Islamic religion was entirely peaceful, I don't think is accurate. But neither is it a terribly violent faith that was spread by fire and sword completely. But rather, when you go to interpret jihad, this comes through various legal schools as whether it can be defensive only or whether it is offensive. And eventually, there are some Sufi mystics who also offer other interpretations, where you call jihad is actually something that is mostly part of the inner struggle of the faith within the human psyche. And this is the greater struggle. And then the lesser struggle is with the conflict of the world and the wars that are required to be fought by the faithful. And we won't go through the entire litany of the Islamic conquests of the world, but the caliphs, who will be called the Umayyads, eventually will take over and conquer all of Syria, and they will move the capital from Mecca to Damascus. And from there will be sort of a very slow death of the Eastern Roman Empire, and from the Umayyad conquests, the Muslims will spread out and go all the way across northern Africa. They will conquer the Mesopotamia. They would conquer Baghdad, the greatest city in the ancient world. They would go all the way to Transoxiana, capturing the Great Silk Road posts of Bukhara and Samarkand, all the way to India. So they were great warriors, and they completed this entire conquest almost of the lower Mediterranean basin all the way into Transoxiana in 100 years. This is an incredible conquest. So it goes basically from being a tribal, nomadic, highly rural area, a group of nomadic peoples within the Arabian Peninsula, into one of the most sophisticated urban civilizations that ruled over the vast majority of the sophisticated world. Now, how did the Muslims treat people after they conquered them? Well, as long as you were a Jew or a Christian or sometimes a Zoroastrian, could make an argument that they were a monotheist who had received authentic revelations of Allah, they were allowed to basically carry on living the way they wanted. They could retain their faith. They could retain their own culture. They just couldn't spread it, right? You can't pass it outside your family, but you can retain your ancestral faith. But here's the kicker: you have to pay the jizya, which is a tax, which is quite high. So it could be anywhere from 20 to 30%, depending on where you lived, of your entire income. It's kind of questionable how the tax was assessed and how it was paid, but you could, as a people of the book, or a person of the book, a family of the book, a monotheist, a fellow monotheist, you could retain your faith, but you had to pay big. So there's incentives to go ahead and convert to the Muslim faith if you didn't take your faith extremely seriously. Pagans did not have this luxury. That if you were a polytheist, a tribal religious practitioner, you had two options that you could, well, actually, you had three options. You could leave, or you could convert, or you could be killed. Those are your options. Most did not take door number three. But this is how conquered peoples were treated. Now we can see here in the modern makeup of the world that the vast majority of Muslims are Sunni, and a smaller minority are Shia, and then you sort of have these mystical, strange group of people that are Sufis. That they don't really fall into any neat or careful camp, but they sort of have their own unique beliefs about these imams who came and then they disappeared, and that there is a imam in hiding, a leader who could authoritatively interpret the faith, and that he will sort of arise at the darkest hour and return. But it's very interesting, but we don't have time to get into all that. But much like at the time of the Reformation, we see a fracturing of the Muslim faith communities that, based upon their interpretations of the faith, that many come to be part of both the Sunni and Shia camps, but from that they branch off into many other aspects of the faith, that because of different interpretations of ways they live and things like this. So much like in Christianity, where you see many different denominations, the same can sort of be said that the breakdown of the entire unity of the faith, it was happened from early on. So as I said, you can see here the map of the expansion of Islam, and again, 100 years that the Islamic communities from Arabia were able to spread across the most rich and powerful regions of the ancient world. And after the Umayyads, who did the initial expansion of the world, you have the transfer of power after a great struggle between the ruling family. The winners out of this power struggle move the capital of the Ummah to Baghdad, right, the greatest city in the ancient world. And they become the caliphs out of Baghdad, and these people are called the Abbasids. And they are able to exert enormous influence, both politically as well as through their interpretations of the faith. And they were able to really create an empire, if you will. The Umayyads largely were able to do this, but really the Abbasids perfect this ability to have an empire where they would use regional governors called emirs that would rule over certain areas, and they were highly successful in convincing people to live within their empire and play a role in this, and it really took on the role of the old Persian Empire, or even Rome, one could argue, that the Abbasid caliphs really were almost as powerful, if not as powerful, as the Roman emperors of old. But like all great powers, the great caliphs of the Abbasids fractured, and it breaks down, and eventually the excuse me, the Islamic world is transferred to the control of, or at least the Mediterranean basin is transferred to the control of the Fatimids. The Fatimid caliphs, who they are claiming the right to rule. There can really only be one caliph in clear interpretation of the traditions of the Muslim communities. There can only be one rightful successor, but many people began to claim this title of caliph and try to exert its authority. But the Fatimids are able to kind of carve their regional power base out in Egypt, and they are able to spread this across all of northern Africa. And the division that comes out of this time period, the fracturing of the caliphate, it creates a situation where there's endemic civil wars among the Islamic factions, which allows eventually the Crusaders in 1098 to be able to come in and find a power vacuum, and this is why they were really able to be successful, why kind of a group of vagabond warriors from Europe is able to trace 2,000 miles away from their power base and able to capture the city of Jerusalem. It's quite amazing, really, but the reason it was able to happen was because of the massive civil wars and infighting, the disagreements among the differing groups of Muslim leaders. So this was made a really interesting period in history turn into a really catastrophic one because of the massive amount of warfare then that happened and hatred that persists even to this day between Christian and Muslim for something that happened 1,000 years ago. But this civil war caused the situation that allowed this all to happen. But let us talk of happier times, and let us speak of Al-Andulus Spain. And the last of the Umayyads. Remember the poor old Umayyads who were purged in their capital of Damascus, and the Abbasids then set themselves up as the rightful leaders. Well, there was one survivor who fled to the farthest regions of the Islamic world into Spain, and that was Ibn al-Rahman. And he proclaimed himself emir. And this, he carved out this kind of great community where there were Christians, where there were Jews, where there were Muslims, and this was the Caliphate of Cordoba in southern Spain, and it's a beautiful region of the world, but these people, for a short time, for a century and a half or 2 centuries, were able to live together in relative peace. And there is nothing like the architecture, the learning, the art that came out of this great cosmopolitan, this cross-pollination of regions. And through the governance of the emirs, this region was able to become quite rich, that they were able to have highly urbanized cities, that they were able to develop technology, they were able to innovate and use their resources, it was one of the most successful regions in the world for a short time. And it also became an intellectual center, that if you wanted to train in philosophy or medicine or anything in kind of the dark ages of Europe or in the Middle East, you would then travel to Spain, where you would study under these great masters in these universities where you would have Muslim, Christian, and Jew who all were able to work together, who were able to translate texts. Cordoba, the great university at Cordoba, had the largest library in the world for a time, and with 450,000 volumes, and that's a whopper of a library in the ancient world. Comparable to that at the Library of Alexandria or the libraries at Baghdad. And one of the most famous philosophers that comes out of this intellectual ferment is Ibn Rashid, or who is known in the Christian Middle Ages as Averroes, or the philosopher. He successfully interpreted the ancient thinker Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, and he was able to explain Aristotle in a way that everyone who came after him could much more easily understand Aristotle, because Aristotle's thought is tremendously complex. Many of the Christians were who used Averroes, who had to use Averroes to understand this, were kind of embarrassed or ashamed, that they had to turn to a Muslim to explain to them how to incorporate Aristotle into their own Christian theology. So therefore, they just began calling him the philosopher rather than calling him Ibn Rashid or his Latinized name of Averroes. But nevertheless, this was a great time in the history of Spain. This was a great history in the time of the world. But eventually, all good things must come to an end. And Spain, the Christians in Spain began a period a long period that historians refer to as the Reconquista, the reconquering of the Cordoba, or the Caliphate of Cordoba. And eventually, the Christians in the north were able to successfully push out all the Muslims, and the Jews, and the Inquisition was brought in, and it's kind of sad in many ways, but nevertheless, for a time, this was a great period of religious toleration, of intellectual ferment, and of highly sophisticated cultures that came to work together. So this concludes our lectures for Islam, and I hope everyone has come to have a deeper appreciation for the development of a tiny faith that began among nomadic peoples in the Arabian Peninsula and transformed into one of the largest faiths and the greatest territorial conquests in the medieval world. And today is the second largest faith in the world. So it's really incredible when you sit down and you look at the exploits of these Arabian horsemen who came and conquered and did this all for their faith and a little bit of glory, but it's a monumental achievement within the medieval world. So thanks for watching. Stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.